Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. We're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. Joining me on the show today, brilliant mind, American historian expert, and my friend, David Barton. David's the founder of Wall Builders, a national pro-family organization that presents America's forgotten history and heroes, with an emphasis on our moral, religious, and constitutional heritage. David's the author of numerous best-selling books, largely based on his research from his massive library of original historical writings. He's a very sought-after speaker, bringing the truth of America's history to churches, civic and military groups, schools and universities, and community events. He also hosts a daily radio show, The Wall Builders Show. Because of his exhaustive research, he's very sought after as an expert in historical and constitutional issues. He serves as a consultant to state and federal legislators, has participated in several cases at the U.S. Supreme Court, was involved in the development of the history and social studies standards for states such as Texas and California, and has helped produce history textbooks now used in schools across the nation. A national news organization has described him as America's historian, and Time magazine called him a hero to millions, including some powerful politicians. He's also been named one of America's most influential evangelicals by Newsmax and Time magazine. David, thank you so much for being on Politically Basic today with me.
Great to be with you, Cal. Thanks for having me.
Well, listen, I know you, and I know that you know so much. So we could go full Joe Rogan today, but I want to focus more on just our current political events and questions of the day. We're in a golden age of Trump 2.0. And there are a lot of issues that Americans are still dealing with coming out of this election. And so we'll try to keep it in a lane. But I just love you to pieces and so glad that you're on the show with me today.
Thank you. And there is a lot to talk about. There's no question about that for sure.
Absolutely. Well, you and I were chatting right before we started recording. And as we do, and trying to catch up quickly. And I was telling you that, I'm here in D.C. right now, seeing a lot of our mutual friends, leaders in the conservative movement, and talking about how many people are here from your home state, Texas, telling us and me that they've had their fill. We're full up on Californians coming that way. And you said something that just blew my mind. So if you'll share with my listeners what's going on in Texas.
Well, where I am is outside the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but I grew up in a very rural part of the state. When I was growing up here, literally the largest Charolais cattle ranch in the world was right beside Aledo, the fourth largest Hereford ranch in the world, which is a breed of cattle, and the sixth largest Angus ranch in the world, and 3 of the top 10 dairies. So this is a very rural, very cowboy, very agrarian. I rode my horse back and forth to work. It was that kind of a place. There were 220 people in town. We now have 250,000 people in town. Of the 10 fastest growing counties in the United States, 6 of them are right here around us. So we have blown up in a way that no one in this area ever expected. And this is going in a lot of places. This last a couple of weeks, I've been at several state legislators. I was testifying at Nebraska. In Nebraska, the Cornhusker state, they're talking about how many Californians have moved in and how it's changing what's happening in Nebraska. And then I was in North Dakota, same thing, and talking to the governor in South Dakota, same thing. So all these fairly politically conservative states, or at least traditional states, are having an influx of people from a lot of, I guess, political refugees that don't like the wackiness where they're living right now. So it's going not just in Texas, but it's going all over the country.
Well, I'd say I'm sorry, but I guess what I should say is thank you. Being a Californian, a lifelong Californian, and loving our state so much. People don't want to be refugees. We're grateful to Texas and other states and communities that have welcomed, people like Californians who just either can't survive it anymore, or can't stand it, frankly. They don't want to leave, but we're glad for another great place to go to. I was just talking to one of your legislators at dinner last night, and she was talking about the infrastructure and just saying, now Texas has got all these water issues and infrastructure issues, not just because of all the political refugees coming over there, but obviously, the illegal immigrant issue is such a problem. But I mean, at some point, you're just going to not be able to take in all of these people, don't you think?
Well, at some point it will correct itself because you'll have such an overload. It's like New York City. You blow it up and you get so big that you finally Detroit. Look at Detroit shrinking, 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 half of what they were 15, 20 years ago. So you get to the point where people don't like what's there. They don't like the traffic. They don't like sitting in their car for hours a day because they can't get around because you can't build roads fast enough to accommodate the infrastructure that's there. So that will change. And I think one of the things too that will have to change in America is as a result of our education and a result of what we have available with social media and all technology, everything is instantly available to us right now. But that is never, never, never the way that politics works. Politics always works slowly. As a Christian, as a person who reads the Bible, I look at God when he told the children of Israel, hey, I've got the promised land over here for you. And then he told them twice, he said this twice, one in Deuteronomy 7 and one in Exodus 23. He said, but I will not give it to you all at once. You will only get it little by little. It took them generations to occupy all the promises that God had given them. And we keep thinking that one election, like a Trump election, is going to fix things, and now we're going to be okay. And it's not. If people would put attention where they live, in California, anywhere else, they could change that. But what happens is they get frustrated because they don't want a 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 cycle, 10 election cycle change. They want something now. And they see Texas, and we've had, good governors and we've had good legislatures for a number of years. We can go there. That doesn't mean it stays that way. We're fighting our own changes now with people to come in with different mindsets, and that's part of it. So one of the things, and I'll just hit it really strong because I'm absolutely convinced of this, politically, historically, biblically, everything else. The change does not happen from the top down. It changes from the bottom up. And it doesn't change because you get a new president or a new governor. It changes because you get better school boards and you get better utility districts and you get better city councils. And then those people go on to become better state representatives and better senators. And they go on to become better congressmen and better U.S. senators. And they go on to become presidents and political leaders. And so the process, I mean, as a historian, if I go back to the American War for Independence with George Washington, man, what a great guy to have leading your military, George Washington. Except what we forget is George Washington was involved in 17 battles in the American War for Independence. There were 250 battles in the War for Independence. George Washington had nothing to do with most of what went on in the war. And of the 17 battles he's involved with, he only won 6 of the 17. He lost more than what he won, and everything today writes as if George Washington did everything. He did not. He was the right leader for the right time, but we also had leaders all the way down. We had Massachusetts state leaders and South Carolina state leaders, and we had the local militias, and that's what Lexington and Concord was all about. There was no national figure at the Battle of Lexington, the Battle of Concord, the Battle of Bunker Hill. They were all just the citizens saying, hey, you British are not going to do this in our town. We're not going to let you do this in our town. And that's we had the Battle of Great Bridge in Virginia. Nobody's ever heard of that battle. We had all these 250 battles across the United States that nobody ever heard of. But it's because we won so many local battles that we won the national battle. And that's what we have to get in our minds politically, because that's the way it always works. It's not going to be, and man, has President Trump made some good changes already. But let me just put context on that. President Trump is over 400 separate agencies. Those separate agencies, there are 3 million employees. He averages about 7,500 employees per agency. And if you have a rogue agency, as we recently saw with they're going to release all the Epstein files, and you had the Southern District of New York FBI office says, we really don't care what the president says. We're not going to release the files. We're going to hold those files back. And now Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and others are trying to figure out how to make the government do what it's supposed to do, because they're ignoring their own boss. They're ignoring their own directors. This is the stuff that we're going to have. And Trump can't fix that. He can't fix the 3 million federal employees. It's just got to be changed by the people from the bottom up. And we have to change that system. And that happens through a series of elections. It's not going to be just what Trump can do. We're dealing with 400 separate agencies here, many of which have been rogue on their own. And that's going to take some time. And when he leaves office, the next president's going to be dealing with some of the things he did not get finished, and the president after that, and the president after that. So again, looking at political refugees coming to Texas, which is where this started, that's not going to solve their problem being in Texas. And if they don't come in with a mindset that I'm going to be involved, I'm going to make sure that this is politically sound. Whatever city I move into, I'm going to make sure we got great leaders and great school boards and great county attorneys and great supervisors. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter who the president of the United States is.
Mm-hmm. Did I mention how much I love you, David? Because you just absolutely nailed it right out of the gate. I mean, we could wrap here. We're not going to, because I have 8 million questions for you. But no, you absolutely summed this period of time up so perfectly. And what I do is on a generalist level, but that helps me to see this broadly. I mean, you're so brilliant. You see this at so many different levels, but I think that's exactly right. Trump is moving at warp speed. I mean, that's what he called, this vaccine for COVID. That project was warp speed, and he has kicked it into some new gear now with how much is happening, and coming from decades of government moving like molasses now. All of a sudden we have a president who's in there cranking out an executive order a day or multiple, and dispatching his cabinet and all of his secretaries to go clean out these agencies and do all this work. Now all of a sudden it's like a rubber band being snapped, and everyone's like, oh great, we're getting all of this done. But to your point, it's going to take time. And so I love that you're speaking to really the heart of this issue, is that we've got to now have this education and this understanding as the American public that we still have our role in this. We can't just sit back and expect a presidency, an administration to now just go take care of all these problems, and we don't have a part in it. We absolutely do. And I love what you're saying. We've got to get involved at the local level. Also, these 4 years are going to fly by, and executive orders can be overturned. There's so much work to be done still. So talking about this and just kind of where we are. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And jumping into that, because this is another principle I think is really important for people to understand. If you go back again, as I often go back to the Bible, there is a verse in 2 Timothy 2:5 that says, no one is crowned victor unless they run according to the rules. And rules become important. And this is something that most people don't like. They don't want to get into. They don't want to get into the rules. They don't like the homeowner association rules. They don't like all the regulations.
Well, David, homeowners associations are the worst. But yes.
Exactly. And so
I'm with you, though. I'm with you.
So take over your homeowner association.
There you go. Yes, group. Thank you.
Yeah. Instead of, because I don't know anybody likes their homeowner association. Great. Get in it, get elected to it, take it over, make it right where it doesn't do all the micromanagement. But in that sense of process, rules are important. And I say that because if you look at the U.S. Senate right now, the U.S. Senate has all its rules it runs by. 16 of those rules that it has right now were written by Thomas Jefferson when he was president of the Senate in 1801. We had the same set of rules for 200 years in the Senate, essentially. Of course, they've got some more modern ones, but you look at that rule process, and that's where you really have to understand the process if you're going to make change. That takes some study. And this is where politics is so boring, and nobody wants to put this time in it. We want the results. We don't like the process that gets us there. But I'm going to go back to Trump for a minute. Trump, president, 2017, 2021. Good for him. And he goes in and says, we're going to drain the swamp. Good for him. He did not know what the swamp was, and he didn't know that he didn't know what the swamp was, because as soon as he leaves office as a sitting president, he has 28 criminal lawsuits coming after him. That's never happened in history. And it was paperwork kind of stuff that they yell at, like we saw in New York. They're trying to criminalize him because of paperwork, and the paperwork wasn't even illegal, as the court made clear. So he starts understanding, hey, the swamp's a lot deeper than what I thought it was. They didn't come after him when he was president. They came after him when he's out of president. And so now he understands, hey, this is a deeper process than I thought. So he comes in. I mentioned the 400 agencies. Let me put some context on that. He comes in, he nominates cabinet members, and they have to be ratified by the Senate. They all go through a process. It takes a while. When he was president last time, He came in and he had probably half his nominees that never even got a hearing in the Senate. He never even got to install about half the people he wanted. So he comes in this time, he's got 1,400 people that are going to have to be ratified by the U.S. Senate. So first off, imagine coming up with a list of 1,400 competent, qualified people that can take what you want to do and move it forward and then get them ratified by the Senate. They have to go through hearings and confirmations and be ratified. So he's looking at 1,400 people. Now, that's going to take at least a year with a willing Senate, a Senate that wants to ratify his people. That's going to take at least a year. And already we've had some votes that are so close to the vice president had to cast the deciding vote on that. So getting his 1,400 people in line is not an easy thing for him to have to do. Below that, there are what are called Schedule C appointments. And those Schedule C appointments are people that are going to be put in as chief over some sub-agency or some group. And there's 2,000 of those. He gets to choose those, but you better make the right choices. So all this last 4 years, he's done nothing but vetted people and looking at people and trying to put personnel together, because personnel is policy. We may think we elect people for that. It's the personnel you bring around you. I have seen in Congress, all the friends I have in Congress, all my times, I've seen two, and I'm a pro-life individual. I've seen two Democrats that were pro-abortion that became pro-life because they got different staff members in who gave them different information. You get a different chief of staff. You get a different legislative director. You get somebody who gives you different, because the president cannot know what's going in 400 agencies, and he's got 4,000 people essentially that he's appointing. He relies on personnel. And if you don't get the right personnel, it's not going to happen. And so this is where, man, if you want to make a difference in government, start working to be an aide to a state legislator, because you become the gatekeeper for all that information. If you can feed them the right information, you're going to start getting better votes from your legislators. And so we yell about, as Republicans, we yell about what we call rhinos, Republicans in name only. They don't follow the platform. They don't follow the beliefs. That usually is a personnel problem. It usually is a staff problem, not an election problem. And so that's another part of the process, that if we're going to have the change we want in America, we've got to understand how the process works and start working to become part of that process at that level and help support the president or the governor or my state rep or state assemblyman or state senator, whoever. Help support them at that level if you really want change.
So applicable. Thank you for giving that guidance to everyone, because as we sort of wrap our heads around what's going on right now politically, it's very different from what we've been used to. And again, I think that the more practically we can show people what they can do in these next 4 years to not just get the work done now, but make sure it doesn't all get unwound going forward. I really appreciate that. And I want to ask you more about that. But you're talking about the platform. Now, I know you've been involved in creating some of those planks and those tenets of the platform in the past. And things went differently this year. And it was strategic, right? Broader, opening things up, not being tethered to specifics, especially in the Republican platform. I think the Democrat platform just sort of like took the train really hard off the tracks. And there wasn't a lot of involvement in terms of following any kind of democratic process. But where we're at now, what we've seen since the election, David, and where we're at now seems to feel generally and culturally like a retethering to traditional conservative values in a modern way, but also to faith, and especially amongst Gen Z and younger generations. Are you seeing that? What's your take on all of that?
Yeah, right now I think America is in a moral and cultural crisis in several ways. We saw that reflected in the Republican platform. As you mentioned, I was one of the delegates, and I've done that on 5 separate occasions. So every 4 years, each party writes their platform to say, here's what we plan to do in the next 4 years under this president. If our guy gets elected, here's what we're going to try to do. So typically, the Republican platform is 70 to 90 pages. So the Democrats about the same thing. They go through and they cover just every kind of policy you can think of, what we plan to do. For Republicans, our rules require that we do this once a year when they have the national convention. It's a 1-week process. Every state elects 2 delegates from that state to represent that state's views and writing the platform for the entire party, the platform on which the president is going to stand when he runs, etc. And so over that process of time, what happened this time was that 1 week process got turned into 35 minutes. And quite frankly, the Republicans threw all their rules out the door and said, here's what we're going to do. Here's the president's platform. That's what we're going to do. The people aren't going to write a platform. And it was very frustrating for a lot of Republicans because in that platform, and one of the chief moral and social issues for the Republicans is protecting unborn life. That's something that goes back literally to our founding fathers. People don't think the issue's that old. Yes, it is. We have this, you mentioned, Kyle, that we have this vast museum of collected materials. We have writings from founding fathers who signed the Constitution, who were sitting on the Supreme Court in 1791, talking about the abortion issue and how that the Declaration protects the unborn right to life, not just the right to life of all individuals, but the unborn. So abortion's nothing new. The Bible talks about abortions back in the days of Moses. People were doing abortions then. Of course, it was chemical, not medical abortions, but there were still people who were pregnant who didn't want to be pregnant. So it's not like abortion is something new. This is something that's been part of our history for 4,000 years as humans. And in dealing with that, President Trump came out with a platform that very much weakened the abortion issue. And for a lot of Republicans said, this is terrible. The president, he's going to get in and not, well, it was a political decision, not a moral decision. And I say that because America is much less pro-life now than what it has been because Christians in America are walking away from pro-life issues. We saw that only 10% of pastors in the last 2 years have even mentioned the life issue from the pulpit when the scripture deals with it so heavily. So it was my belief that Trump was not less pro-life, that he was simply taking a political position because so much of the younger generation has been taught that, hey, a life is not that, it's about me and what I want. What if my friends, what if my daughter became pregnant and she didn't want to be? We don't want that baby. And so rather than understanding it's a human life, we've moved into convenience for us. And we recognize that politically, and I think Trump recognized that politically. And his political campaign advisors, Chris LaCivita, Susie Wiles, who's now his chief of staff, that was a calculated political position they took. We now know that's true because since he's been in office, he's become more pro-life than he was the first term, but it wasn't something he could run on. And that's a result of literally church community, Christian faith community, has really backed down on a lot of moral issues. They backed down on gender issues. They were not talking about those. President Trump has come in and doubled down on that. He's made the gender issue one of his top 3 issues, which was interesting because during the campaign season, politically polling-wise, it was way down at number 9. It was not a big issue for anybody in the campaign except him. And he made it a big issue. He said, if I get in, here's what I'm going to do in the military, and here's what we're going to do throughout all of our social programs. And he got elected on that. And it turned out that in the post-election polling, gender issue was one of the top 3 issues for voters. That was a big deal for them. Title IX, which we got back in the 60s and 70s to create women's sports, was going out the door because you got guys competing as women and winning women's. Why would you have women's sports? Let's just open it up for everybody to do whatever they want. And people weren't liking that. And so back to the platform, President Trump actually took something that made a lot of Republicans mad because they thought he was compromising on their core issue. And it was a political choice because he's now stronger in that issue than he was before. But it was something the nation is just not there. And I fault the faith community for that. I don't fault the political community. Political community is not in charge of the morals. The faith community is. And until the faith community gets its backbone back and gets its voice back, the political guys are not going to lead. Now, I credit Trump. He's being a leader in this when he didn't have much following behind him. And I think that speaks well of his moral convictions. And that may seem strange for me to say that about Trump, but he's got some very clear moral guidelines. He's got some very clear faith advisors around him. He just opened the first ever office of a White House faith office. We've had that as kind of an agency, but not a White House office. And so he's done some remarkable things and remarkable leadership that I think is going to pay off in the long term for him.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point that he's doing his job, right? He is fulfilling the promises that he made, but you could make the argument that Trump is going well beyond even what he promised on the campaign, and we might see some attacks from the opposition that, it's a bait and switch, and he opened things up on the platform and made them more broad to bring in people who were not as firmly connected to those ideals, and now he's coming in and writing executive orders on those issues and moving that work forward. So it sounds like, you are satisfied with the work that he is doing, and now it's the faith community that needs to come and educate the American public about, what is happening and what our role is. But do you really feel that way? Is Trump doing enough? And how does the faith office play in here and in bridging those two?
And I am satisfied with what he's doing. I'm just awed with what he's doing. But I also recognize everything he's doing is temporary. You mentioned executive orders. A lot of his executive orders has simply been overturning Biden's executive orders. And so you can't have a nation that runs on the rule of law when the standards change every 4 years. You just can't do that. That's not the way the law works. We put people in prison, and 4 years later we got different laws. So let's put different people. You can't do that. You have to have laws that are based on moral rights and wrongs that everyone understands and comprehends. So I'm thrilled with what he's doing, but I know it's only temporary unless we get some fundamental change in the way that citizens think and act, and in some deep-rooted agencies. And at this point, he's in a month. He's already got 70 lawsuits filed against him on his executive orders from people in his agencies that are under him that are supposed to be taking his orders. So he's firing people that are incompetent and breaking the law, and they're filing lawsuits against him to get their jobs back. And we've already seen, and by the way, to understand how this works, it's called forum shopping. You go find a judge that has your philosophy that will give you a ruling that you're going to get, and you file with that judge. There are hundreds of judges across the United States, and they will go to a California and say, in California, which is where one of these big suits is, because he's firing people that are not following the instructions of the president. And if you're not going to do that, you can't have anarchy in the government. And if you're going to disobey the president, I'm going to fire you, because every position is supposed to be an at-will position in the federal government. Nobody is supposed to be unaccountable. Everybody is supposed to be accountable. And so he's now holding people accountable, and they're saying, well, we don't like what you're doing, and we're just going to outlast you. And so he's firing them. And now they found a judge in California who has ruled, oh, no, you can't fire people that disagree with you. Yes, you can. You can do that in any job, at any place, at any point in time. And yes, unions exist to try to protect your job, but that was never the design, never the intent. People put capital as investors. I have private businesses. I put capital into that, and I want to make money off of that. And if I'm going to have an employee that's going to stop what I want, I'm going to get rid of that employee because it's my business. He is the executive. Those 3 million employees are his employees. They work for the president. They don't work for the American people. And that's the way the Constitution sets it up. And so at this point, 70 different lawsuits, if you can imagine that. Some of the people who are here illegally say, hey, you can't send us home. Wait a minute, the law says we can send you home. And so they're filing lawsuits, and agencies are filing lawsuits, and employees are filing lawsuits, and people, we've got, at this point, about 70% of the federal workforce works from home. And there is no accountability on whether they're getting anything done at all, which is why Elon Musk sent out that memo, said, hey, tell me 5 things you did at your job last week, because we hired you to work for the American people. I just want to know you're doing that. 70% are working at home and have no supervisor of any kind over them. And so we don't know that they're doing anything but getting paid. All of that has got lawsuits going now. Common sense says that's not the way it should be. But that's the difference between a private sector mentality and a public sector mentality that says, I'm entitled to this job. I can live off the public funds. That's what taxes are for, is to pay for me to have a job. No, it's not. This is where the debt is coming from, 36 trillion now, 36.4 trillion, and we're adding 2 trillion every year. Actually, we were in the last year Biden, we were adding 1 trillion every quarter. That's unsustainable. We will be bankrupt. We will be a third world nation. We will be Venezuela with 200% inflation a few years ago. We'll be looking at all of that. And so that goes back to the process of I'm satisfied with what Trump's doing, but I'm not satisfied with the results yet because the results need to line up with the rule of law. They need to line up with the Constitution, and that means personnel. And there's a lot of personnel that have to be switched out for those that are willing to follow the law, not break the law, and not make their own law.
Yeah, it sort of captivated us recently with this resistance of people to work. It's some people find it funny, some people find it upsetting and sad, but these federal workers, they're reading, emails and reading these texts about these people who have taken second jobs because there is such a lack of accountability that they literally don't feel that they have to do any work at this job. They're taking other jobs, they're taking naps, they're writing about the walks they're going to take on that day. And it's kind of surprising, I would say, to most that we could get to this place in our federal government with these agencies. Trump in his first term, he was so hindered by the lawsuits, by even you could make the argument that Mitch McConnell's heel dragging of certain appointments and to your point, how long it took him. He didn't even get some of those appointments in across 4 years. And how could we get to this point as a nation where we have such incompetency and such corruption and waste rooted into these agencies? When you talk about the numbers, David, it seems overwhelming that nobody could possibly get this fixed in 4 years, but they're really going at it and with Elon Musk's aid and Doge. I love the Doge website because they have this Doge count about how much they're saving the country and how much they're saving the individual taxpayer. But it's all, as it's been cracked open and exposed, it's pretty overwhelming, the work that needs to be done. So I appreciate having these conversations and sharing what we should be doing, what our responsibility is during this time, not just to understand what's going on and how, I guess, unusual it is at this point, but that we all have our role in this to make sure that it doesn't just get unwound. It doesn't just get completely flipped again in 4 years, should, a different political party be in the White House. And we're already starting to talk about that. But so I appreciate everything that you're saying. And I want to get us shifted over to education as a federal agency. We're talking about it generally in a lot of terms. You have such expertise and wisdom in this area of education at the federal level. You participated and led efforts to make sure the textbooks are accurate and get those in the school systems. Obviously, you teach constantly. You are one, if not our nation's most valuable expert on American history and in this realm. I'd love your take on what is happening in our educational system today and Trump's plan to potentially shut down the Department of Education, if not do a massive overhaul of it.
Yeah, there's two issues there. Let me talk to education first off, because one of the things we do at Wall Builders is we have a network of about 1,000 state legislators. There's about 7,400, 7,500 state legislators. And right now is their time. And the way politics works, you go through a year where everything's about elections, like we did last year. And then the next year, everything's about policy. So right now, all these state legislatures are meeting and passing laws. Texas is meeting 140 days is how long our session goes. Just up in Nebraska, I think they meet 60 days or 50 days. And so right now, everything is focusing on legislation. And at the top of nearly all of those lists is education. And that's because education right now is really ridiculously bad. America, there are about 23 industrial nations in the world, and America competes against them. And right now, for the last 15 years, we've come in dead last in every category. We have the lowest reading rate of any industrial. And matter of fact, in the world right now, our literacy rate, we're number 47 in the world. So there's a lot of third world nations who have a higher literacy rate. I recently saw the results from Baltimore. And in Baltimore, 72% of graduating high school seniors cannot read at the third grade level. and they're graduating and they can't read at the third grade level. How can you know what's going on in government and be a steward to help protect government if you don't know what it's doing? Because you can't even read to see what the news is about government. And so all that continues in a very bad direction. We're worst in all the nations, industrial nations, in the STEM areas, in our math and our science, not just in our reading, but in other areas as well. And you look at education, and I'll just throw out how bad things are because this is the reality of where we are. When you look at civics, this is a self-governing nation, supposed to be. But if the people refuse to government, the bureaucrats will. And what happens if the people will not step in and direct their government? Somebody's going to fill that void. And right now it's been all these political hacks and others that are running things. So when you look at government per se, there are three branches. The Constitution is very simple, based on the average reading rate of about 240 words a minute for those who can read. It takes about 22 minutes to read the Constitution. It takes another 8 minutes to read the Bill of Rights. So in 30 minutes, you can read the best governing documents that exist in the history of the world. The average length of a constitution in world history is 17 years. We're 238 years. Nobody's ever done this. If you lived in any other nation with the Constitution, every 17 years, you've got a revolution of the Constitution. So first off, we take our blessings for granted. I think most Americans just expect that this will continue forever because it has. No, it's continued because we have a unique Constitution. So read it. At this point in time, our Constitution sets out three branches. 62% of American people cannot name the three branches of government. Now, if you can't name the three branches of government, you don't know what the president's supposed to be doing. You don't know what the Congress is supposed to be doing, and you don't know what judges are supposed to be doing, which means all of them can get out of their lanes and start doing what the third world nations do and then lose their Constitution as a result. So it starts with knowing that. Now, let's take the next one. When you take 63% can't name the three branches, when it comes to things like separation of powers and the checks and the balances that are there, you're down into about the 12 to 15% range. Know how the president is supposed to be able to stop a runaway judiciary, how the judiciary is supposed to stop a runaway Congress. And if you don't elect people to office who understand that, it's not going to work. So now we're talking about basic education. And so in the last several weeks, I've testified on a number of bills in education committees trying to get some of this fixed for the future. Because if we do not get education fixed, not only reading, but content, knowing what the Constitution says, knowing what's there. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, 62% cannot name the three branches of government. Grab this. 48% of elected officials cannot name the three branches of government.
Stop it, David. That's not real.
So,
that can't be real. It can't be real.
It's real. 48%, which is why you have so many lawsuits, because they keep getting off track and they get sued to get back on track. And, this is what we have with all the...
Well, they're happy to cry and scream about having a constitutional crisis.
And they don't even know what that means.
But they don't know what the Constitution
They don't even know what it means. The constitutional crisis is you're not following the Constitution. You think you are, and you're the crisis. So how do you fix that educationally? And that's where we're backing up. And we have a federal law that's been passed since the 40s that says every year on Constitution Day, September the 17th, every entity in the United States that gets federal dollars, which is all public school, well, except about 3%, 97% of public schools get federal dollars. You have to stop and take that day and teach on the Constitution. That hasn't been followed in years and decades. We don't even know what that document is or what it says or what it means.
I don't think anyone knows that that's the purpose of Constitution Day.
That's the purpose of Constitution Day, is to study the document that made us who we are, because you can't preserve what you don't know. And so you're exactly onto it. At this point, it is about education. And this is where we've seen 32 states go to school choice in some capacity. And from a Constitution establishes a free market competitive system for all things in government. That's why we have open elections. That's why we have parties. We offer alternatives. Competition is the best thing. If it wasn't for competition, we would have 5 government-run hamburger stands at every intersection, and they'd all be serving the same thing for the same price. Fortunately, I can go get lettuce on this one, or I can get mayonnaise on this one, or I can get whatever. And we get the choices, and we lower the prices as a result. We increase the quality and we increase the service. We're not doing that with education. We're having the same government stuff. And so 32 states that have gone to school choice have all seen increased educational scores, increased educational accountability. And we've still got a party that in their platform says we don't want any competition in education. Great. That's exactly why we are where we are now, because we've got such a poor system. We're the worst in the world. It needs competition. It needs change. So that's another thing that every citizen can do. If you're in a state that doesn't have school choice, man, go work your legislators to get competition. If you're in a city that doesn't allow school choice, work your school board to get competition. Work your city council, get competition in their contracts, in their bidding, and everything they do. These are fundamental principles that every citizen can weigh in on. And I'll just add to that, the average legislator gets 3 contacts on any piece of legislation. If you and your neighbors were to call a legislator, you would scare him to death, because he typically gets 3 contacts on any piece of legislation. If he got 10 or 12 calls, he would be frightened and would, change the direction likely of where he's headed. So again, it's in our hands. We the people have more competency to do things than we think, and we have more ability. I'm glad for President Trump, but if we do not get this thing fixed at the bottom level, we can't fix it from the top down. It's got to be from the bottom up.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about school choice and vouchers really quickly, but I love the point that you're making. Sometimes people say, "Oh, call your congressman or call your congresswoman or, call your state legislator." And it sounds like an ineffective tactic. But you're exactly right. It does not take that many calls. Also, I think people are afraid to pick up the phone and call or email because they don't know what to say. Mm-hmm. So what do people do? Give us some direction on those who maybe get a little anxiety about thinking about calling a state legislator's office and saying, "Hey, I want to voice my opinion to you. This matters." Where can they get some direction for that?
Yeah. Well, one is just remember basic manners, and that's not something we really emphasize anymore. But if you call your legislator, start cussing them, they're going to turn you off real quick, just like anybody on the street.
That's what social media is for. Save it for your rant.
That's right.
On TikTok.
That's right. On social media. Use civility. Use, the scripture talks about easily entreating someone, and that just be, hey, listen, I'm really passionate about this issue, and I really need you to vote for school choice. Our kids need something better than what they've got. Don't go and say, if you don't vote for school choice, I'm going to make sure you never again get reelected. Do not threaten. Do not cuss. Do not be ugly. Be civil. I mean, really, sweetness does a whole lot more than other stuff. If you want to rant, do it, but do it with your friends and neighbors, not your elected official, because you just make their backbone get stronger, and they're going to prove to you that they're in charge. Right. You want them to be a public servant, which means you need to treat them the way you want to be treated. That's the golden rule. You treat others the way you want to be treated. Jesus told us that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you don't have to understand and be an expert on the issue. You just have to say, this is something I'm really passionate about, and I don't know where you are on it, but I really want you to make sure our kids have choices in education or whatever the issue may be. I really want to see you fix that curve in the road, because there's been too many curves in the road. Straighten that thing out and get the highway department to fix whatever it is. You just voice what's concerning to you, because 99 out of 100 people do not voice anything that's concerning to them. Mm-hmm. And the activists that come in, that's generally who gets a policy, because all these hearings I was at in the last few weeks, the legislators are now starting to give the calls they received, how many for and how many are against. And in one of the states where I was, it's a Republican state. It has 64 Republican House members and 6 Democrat House members. And the Republicans voted against something that's in their platform because the calls are running 10-1 against that issue. And they didn't want to take on the public. But as it turned out, nobody on our side even knew the issue was up. And so no calls had come in from our side. The other side has learned how to use calls to manipulate the process. And so literally, what is a 3% group in that state managed to make enough calls to scare the legislators into killing this piece of legislation. And that's something our guys have got to get good at too. You've got to call legislators and say, you know what? Here, I'm not part of any organized movement, but here's what I think about this issue. Here's what I think about any issue it is, and anything you're passionate about. Call your legislator. That's why they're elected, is to help do policy. So same with the federal legislature. Now, federal legislature, they're not going to care who you are, but they do count numbers, and it does make a difference. At that level, a lot of legislators have their own convictions, and they're there and they'll keep their own convictions. But there's a lot of issues where you can move legislators. It's harder to move a federal legislator than it is to move a state legislator. It's harder to move a state legislature than it is to move a city council member. The more local the government, the more easily you can impact and affect them. But you still need to be involved in contacting your legislator at every single level.
Yeah, that's great advice. We need to be using our voices and in all platforms. Picking up the phone is great too, but do it across the board, right? Email, post on socials, share information with other constituents in your community about how to do what you're doing and really try to get that multiplier effect.
That's right.
Going. So I love hearing from you on that. I want to give my listeners really the meat and potatoes of this school choice issue, because I cannot tell you, David, how many times a week now I am getting approached or reached out to by other parents who are upset over what their child is being taught. And it's mostly a public school issue, but there are plenty of charter and private schools that are struggling with these issues. The teachers are bringing their own personal ideologies in and trying to influence kids. We've still got trans flags flying and no state or American flag flying. The history being taught is very skewed or missing critical parts of history. You know this so well. But those parents, I'm getting flooded. I personally am getting flooded with questions and requests for, hey, can you call your school, or how do I shift? And the schools that are good, that are not, introducing those kinds of influences, they're full. Their waiting lists are longer than a CVS receipt. And that's really long for those of you who don't live in California. So can you give us some practical guidance here on you just explained how to advocate, and I think that's great, to advocate for school choice. But these vouchers are important, and I don't think people have a really great understanding of how the vouchers work, how those taxpayer dollars can be reserved for the taxpayer to make school choice. What do we do, boots on the ground here, as parents who are really concerned about this as we see this issue getting worse and worse for us?
Yeah, I will point out that you want to go back to fundamental principles. That's one of the things that the founding talked about, was a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. You keep going back to the basics, go back to the basics. And one of the basics is competition. That's why we're the most prosperous nation in the world. We have a free market competitive system where we compete. Anywhere you have competition, you have a healthy system. Anywhere you lack competition, you lack a healthy system. You are, by definition, of lack of competition is what you have with socialism. Any government, heavy-handed government system where it's government regulated, government controlled, you have socialism and you have poor productivity. So the first thing is, well, I don't want school choice because I don't want the government getting involved in private education. No. School choice is getting the government out of private education. The government already regulates private education now with health standards, with all sorts of standards. And by the way, if you don't have school choice, the state laws are trying to be imposed on homeschools and what they teach homeschools. And so you have to fight back on that and say, no, this is a free market system. This is a constitutional system we have in America. And you're not going to get into that area. So that means you also have to be politically involved. So if you don't like politics, which nobody does, you still got to get involved in it, because that's the only way you preserve your freedoms. Nobody's going to voice your concerns like you voice your concerns. And you need to do that. And you need to raise your kids to do that. So going back to school choice, the first principle is free market competition. You want to do anything you can in any system to get free market competition. Now, there are school choice programs. I mentioned 32 that are out there. Some of them have some government regulation in them. It's less government regulation than what the schools have had before, but people don't like that. Well, I'll go back to what the scripture says. When we began with this, you don't get it all at once. The Bible says he will give it to you little by little. So you take every advance you can to get the government out of education and to get parents more involved in education, get communities more involved. So right now, probably the perfect choice programs are what you have in Arizona, where you have educational savings accounts, where the state will take your tax dollars and put it into an account for you, and you get to take that dollar and spend it where you want educationally. That's your choice. You get to control everything about your kids' education. You do that. Some states say, well, we'll give you a voucher, and you can have $7,500 voucher, but you have to use it on this kind of an educational choice. Well, that's still a better choice than having no choice, and it may not be your perfect choice, and it may not pay for everything you want with education, but at least you're getting a subsidy of maybe of $7,500, maybe $10,000 in some. I think Texas is looking right now, of all, we're a very conservative state. We've never been able to get school choice in Texas because the teachers are so much stronger in conservative states. Probably the largest, loudest lobby in conservative states is teachers. And by the way, I'm going to make a little political point here. We've always thought that rural communities, not the urban or suburban, but the rural communities are the most conservative communities. That's out where the farmers and the ranchers and the hard workers and people live. And so they're more conservative out there. And they are nearly always the ones who oppose school choice in a state. It's the rural school districts who say, hey, we got great teachers. We are not San Francisco. That's not who we are. We're out here in the country, and we want you to leave us alone and don't make us like all the cities. And so it's the rural people that show up in most states and oppose that. Well, that's the way it has been in Texas. Look, we still have football games here because we're in rural communities. Dallas doesn't, and Houston doesn't, San Antonio doesn't, Austin doesn't, but we do. Leave us alone. And so rural districts don't want school choice. Well, this year a study was done, and of what they consider rural districts, they consider they have conservative teachers there. They're not wacky teachers like Houston and Dallas and what. They're conservative, really. As it turns out, 92% of all rural teachers made the political contributions they made, 92% went to the Democrat Party.
That's really surprising.
So even in the rural areas, you've got Democrat-leaning teachers, which goes back to the point you made earlier, Kyle, and that whole system is so corrupted and so inundated because of the way they were taught. You require the licensing of teachers, and nearly every teacher's college has been taken over by progressives. Mm-hmm. So even if you have a teacher teaching in a rural area, they're probably 92% likely to be very progressive. So what you have to do is break that system up, and that is school choice. So in Maine, the Supreme Court in the last 3 years has had two school choice things where that in Maine they said, well, we got school choice, but we're not going to let you use school choice in religious schools because separation church and state. And the Supreme Court said, no. If it's tax dollars, it goes to any choice the parent makes, and you can use that in religious schools. So now even Maine has a school choice program that funds education in religious schools. It's not as much as the public schools get, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And you can, if you're a working parent, and I wish I could homeschool my kids, but I'm working, get in a homeschool co-op where that there are parents and parents who will be the teachers for classes of homeschoolers. So it's a homeschool setting in a quasi-early American one-room schoolhouse kind of setting. So there's so many options out there now. Look for anything that breaks up the traditional public school system as it exists, because that is a progressive education factory. Totally and solely. Go for something that gives competition. Look for educational choice.
Yeah, we want to be educationally pro-choice, don't we?
That's right.
We do. Good, and it will hold the public school system accountable, and hopefully that will start turning around into a
Kyle,
situation.
Let me hit that for a minute. We want to be absolutely pro-choice in everything except inalienable rights.
Yeah.
Inalienable rights, the right to life and liberty and property. We don't want to be pro-choice in like slavery, in the 1800s. We choose whether we have a slave or not. No, when it comes to an inalienable right, you don't get a choice on that. You protect inalienable rights, life, liberty, property, speech, religion, etc. You can have choices within that protection, but you're exactly right. It's gotten to where we don't want to say we're pro-choice now because that would mean pro-abortion. I am pro-choice because that's competition. I'm pro-choice in religion. I want people to choose the religion of their choice. I'm pro-choice in so many areas because that is the constitutionally and the biblically sound thing. But I'm not pro-choice when it comes to whether you're going to murder someone or not or kill an unborn child. And that's a great distinction you just made, Kyle. That is such an important distinction. We can't give up the word pro-choice because that is a constitutional choice we have. The right to be pro-choice in my speech, the right to be pro-choice with who I hang out, the right of assembly, the right of petition, all those 5 rights in the First Amendment. And by the way, only 1 in 1,000 Americans can name the 5 rights in the First Amendment. That's how little we study the Constitution in school. We don't even know what our rights are, so we can't defend them. But such a good point on being pro-choice in that area because we are in so many areas.
Well, what a beautiful way to say that and sum it up, and a great conclusion to such a valuable conversation with you today, David. Again, I could talk to you for hours on hours. I love hearing you speak. And before I let you go today, and I do hope that you will come back on the show with me again soon because we didn't even begin to scratch the surface. But I want to direct people to wallbuilders.com because your resources are just off the charts phenomenal. The American Story, some of my actual favorite books on American history, the Founders Bible, all-time favorite Bible. Just your resources are the best that we have. So I do hope people will check out the amazing work that you're doing and do a little shopping in your store too, because they're just great. But thank you so much for coming on and for everything that you shared with my audience today.
Hey, Kyle, thank you for engaging people and educating people and motivating people. Terrific work that you do. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so that you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.